listeners, to a brand new episode of Educator Insights, the podcast where we dive deep into the dynamic realm of teaching in the digital age and the ever evolving embrace of technology. I'm your host, Husena Jadliwala, and it's a pleasure to have you join us for today's illuminating discussion. We are honored to have a distinguished guest whose insights light the path of education like no other. Joining us is the exceptional Sam Williams, whose expertise as an English teacher at Summit Public School brings a wealth of experience to our conversation. I'm really excited about our conversation on the topic of the power of data and technology in modern education. Sam, it's genuinely delightful to welcome you to our podcast. Thank you for gracing us with your presence.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Awesome. I think a good place to start would be by delving into your background a little bit. So, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey as an English teacher at Summit Public School?
Yeah, so I tutored a bit in high school, and then I taught dance for a number of years during college, and then after college while I was in grad school. My master's degree is in creative writing. My bachelor's is in sociology, so I didn't know that I was going to be an English teacher at any point, although the creative writing side does lend itself easily to English teaching. And then I took several odd jobs trying to get my big break as a writer, and that is still a work in progress. So at some point I realized I needed a day job that I actually enjoyed and didn't hate, and signed up for several different credentialing programs here in California, which is an intense credentialing process. It takes about a year. And they're really intense about it, which is good. Like, you want good educators. But there's all sorts of problems with the credentialing process as well. That being said, I made it through my student school teaching year, where I was lashed to this wonderful woman from Queens, New York, who was in California teaching some kiddos. And I ended up getting hired to replace her at Summit Preparatory Charter High School, which is the original of the charter schools that are attached to the Summit Public School network. So I've been here since the school year of 2020. So we went first year as a student teacher, February and March came, and suddenly we were in virtual school. Did virtual school all the next year online while we went through COVID. And then I was back in the classroom, and I've been there ever since.
Wow. So you started teaching during the year of COVID. That's
my first so my first year when I was with a cooperative teacher, we were in school for the first couple of months up until February and March, and then we went into virtual school, and it was virtual school for an entire another year. So my first year solo teaching was online. It was wild.
Wow. Like, I don't think that's anything you expected when you first started, considering as well that you kind of fell into teaching. And that's the interesting part. I find that a lot of educators that I speak to kind of fall into teaching and then they love it. So then they just stay. There's just something about teaching that makes people stick around and do that. Going like even if it wasn't their original plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that said, considering that you started your career in an unconventional way, you were expecting to teach in a classroom, you ended up having to teach virtually because of COVID, and COVID did bring a lot of rapid changes in teaching, especially in this digital age. So how do you stay updated with the latest trends and tools in education technology?
Yeah, the Summit schools are a little different in the fact that the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation, that's Mark Zuckerberg and his wife foundation, they helped to sort of start the Summit Public School while Diane Taverner set it up and said, well, Facebook actually created the platform, this sort of like Canvas like you would use online, but it's a Summit specific online technology that was created by Facebook and then handed over to the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation. And they still do some stuff with Summit, although I'm not involved at all. They work with our home office. And so I actually have learned most of my technology usage by using this online platform where kids turn in everything. That's where we grade. That's how you look at all student data. That's how you access these personal files for students with independent education plans and 504s. Everything that happens in this Summit thing. And then, of course, there's the computer that we have in every student's hand. They get a Chromebook when they come in the door. And so I don't know that I'm staying super up to date with like all the technology that is around it. When I was in virtual school, certainly we used a lot more, whether it was Pear Deck or, Google Slide update, and all of these things that sort of tried to make the classroom a little easier to work with. There, I was using some more technology that other teachers were using. Now that we're back in the classroom and I've tried to decrease the technology usage in there, I'm pretty much only using Summit's technology, which is its own weird thing and is actually going away next year. So like we'll be using Canvas next year and I'll have to
Okay.
reacclimate to that.
Right, right. Is there a reason for moving away and going to
Um,
Canvas?
I don't know, even if I knew, I could say. But I think in general, like we're trying to spend less money on things. So spending money to keep up to date this platform when there are things that are otherwise available. That would be my
Right.
speculation on that.
Right, 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 right. Well, even right now when you're using Summit's technology, and you mentioned about having student data on there
Hmm.
uh, constantly, do you use that to make some data-driven insights that can help with your teaching methods?
Oh, certainly.
Perhaps, yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, we each Summit does a cool, really neat grading technique where we grade not so much on content knowledge, although there is some of that, but on cognitive skills. So your ability to select evidence, your ability to integrate evidence, your ability to explain evidence, your ability to create a thesis, your ability to have an argumentative claim, your ability to describe a counterclaim. We grade on those, and each of those cog skills comes with a rubric. And that rubric it's a sliding scale, so it's not like an ungrading thing. We still give a grade, but it's not necessarily a B C D E F whatever. It's a 4.5 to a 5.5, and then the next year, when you're sophomores, you'll actually be expected to have a 5 and a 6, that sort of stuff. But the rubric is very specific in what you're looking for, and you get to use all that data on all the different cog skills that a certain student has shown. And if you're using that data really well, you can help to mitigate your own personal bias around a student. That's not perfect, right? You can still, like, grading bias comes in, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're using the rubric to the T, which sometimes they're hard to understand, but theoretically, you're able to mitigate a little bit more bias because it's a data-driven model rather than just being like, well, this student turned in late and I don't like them, therefore they get this. But this other student turned in late, but I like them, therefore I did this. Instead, if you're sort of abiding by the number system, you're doing a bit to help out whatever biases you might be bringing into the classroom. So I do look at the student data, although I collect a lot of my own now, and that really helps me more, I think, than anything that Summit provides on the platform. But there's a lot of student data that can be found there. I'll get low-hanging fruits of students that are close to passing. Sometimes I'll work with that group all day to see if with this final product we can finally get them passing. Sometimes the students that are really far away, I'll grab those students. Students that did really well on this cog skill on this day, hey, I know you know how to integrate and explain evidence. I don't need to work with you guys, but I am going to work with the students that have low cog skills on explaining and integrating evidence over here. So you can start to split up your classroom based off of some of the data
Right.
analytics, and that's really neat.
I can imagine that would make like making decisions in the classroom easier as well. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned collecting your own data outside of the Summit technology. I'm a little
Yeah.
I'm interested in, understanding a little bit more about that, if you don't mind sharing.
Well, I'm really interested in students' perspectives of themselves and the student perspective of each other. So there's 4 things that I have students take little surveys on at the end of the day. It's like our exit ticket as we're finishing up class, which is I don't know that I can remember all of them, but they'll take a certain number of questions about how do they do on their revisions, how do they do on their communication and collaboration, how do they do on their self advocacy, how do they do on their physical organization of things. And I also have them partner up some days, and I'll have their partners fill it out for them and fill it out for themselves. So not only do I have, hey, what is your perspective about yourself, student? Because I certainly have mine, and I know mine. I don't really need to always datafy mine because I understand what I think about a student. But if I can see what a student thinks about themselves in a real way, that can be helpful. Now, of course, it's a Google form. People can say whatever they want. There's always going to be a plus minus margin on any of the stats that come out of that. But it is interesting also to see other people's perspective. So when I go to a student and I say, hey, like, you might think you're collaborating really, really well because you're talking all the time, but all your partners since October have said you don't collaborate well, you boss people around. That's my experiences as
Hmm.
well. Like, but you're saying you're collaborating really well. How does that make you feel? And that can make kids feel uncomfortable. But it's a little easier to have a discussion sometimes when there's sort of like this anonymous feedback that they're seeing, oh, my peers don't think I'm doing this, and my teacher doesn't think I'm doing this. Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, you have data to back up what you're saying, so it's not
Yeah.
just coming out of the blue.
Mm-hmm.
And the student can be a little bit more level-headed when listening to
Mm-hmm.
your feedback that way.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
And then I
Well,
also
that
take
that's great.
data.
Yeah,
Yeah,
go
yeah,
ahead.
it's really helpful. I also take data on social emotional learning. So I take
Okay.
data on, hey, are you feeling safe at the school? Have you eaten today? Do
Mm-hmm.
you have access at home to food? Which is a constantly changing question for some of my students.
Right.
And so I want to make sure that their social emotional selves are also being taken care of, and not just sort of the like learning component of school, because these are children and from various degrees social economic backgrounds. So I want to make sure that their social emotional is good, and it gives kids a chance to check in anonymously, or I know their names but nobody else does, and they know if they're feeling not safe, if they're feeling uncomfortable, if they're feeling anxious, if they feel like school's going poorly. I have all this data to either like give to their mentor, or check in with them myself, or talk to the administration about, to be like, hey, look at like all the sophomores this week think that school's going really poorly. Now they have a final product due tomorrow, so that might be part of the problem, but it helps to understand the students in a more holistic way rather than just sort of the grade aspect.
That is so important. It's so important for every teacher to try to understand as well in their own classroom. And you also mentioned about students coming from different socio-economic backgrounds,
Yeah.
and what kind of impact that can have on the student. It can have an impact on their academics, for sure. So if you
Yeah.
don't have that background knowledge, you won't understand why perhaps you're not understanding something. It can even be a cultural difference sometimes. So these are all important things for you to know about your students. And I'm really glad to hear that that's something that you've deemed very important for you to know and collect
Yeah.
data on, in a way,
Totally.
about your students. When you mentioned about your students coming from different socioeconomic backgrounds, I thought about the fact that, and considering your background, the age of your students, there must be a lot of impact of social media on education.
Mm.
What are your observations, both positive and negative?
Yeah, I think social media is such a many-lensed thing. I remember at the beginning of the year, to illustrate a little bit about how social media runs in my classroom. At the beginning of the year, I do a project about debunking conspiracy theories. It's really important to me that we understand how uh, some people can just say whatever they want, and you might start to believe them. But if they don't have verifiable evidence, you should not take it as fact. And that's really hard to get through to some kids sometimes. And I remember one of the part of the projects that I wanted to do this year was have students open up their phones, go on TikTok, and look up conspiracy theories. And a friend of mine said, fellow teacher, history teacher on my grade level, said, yeah, but then I'm worried that the algorithm is going to start sending them conspiracy theories all the time.
It's a good point.
I went,
It
oh
is a good point.
no. Oh, I don't want to do that to them. So, yeah, I didn't do that. What we ended up doing is I ended up giving them a list of conspiracy theories to look up on their Chromebooks. And I specifically told them, don't look it up on your social media. I don't want to be the one that gets your algorithm to do that.
Right.
And kids were really respectful about that. It's really cool when you level with students. Sometimes they're really into it. That didn't help everybody from doing that. Some people still went on TikTok and looked up conspiracy theories and had a very funny time, and some people believed them. I have my own teacher Instagram account where I try and put up assignments and stuff like that, so that people have another access point. That we've got phones that are like attachments to kids. And there was a report in the New York Times, I think, like a year ago or so, that said when students have their phones taken, they feel like an actual part of them is removed. That these are
Oh,
a
wow.
part, an actual part of their body is their phone. And that's, as we update in technology, we just have to be aware that, like, I'm a millennial, not that far from Gen Z, but they have a really different perspective than even I do.
I
And that,
100% agree.
yeah,
Same
that's a
boat as
huge
you.
deal.
Same boat as
Yeah,
you. Yeah.
it's a huge deal.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine so. Well, thank you for sharing that. That you really went into different aspects of social media,
Mm,
and how that can affect education in the classroom as well.
yeah.
You mentioned about distractions, or how distracting it can be. Social media
Yeah,
can be very distracting for students. And you also mentioned that you do still have a teacher Instagram account, which I assume obviously would be for educational purposes.
that's it. That's the only
um,
reason that's there.
yeah. So how do you strike a balance, between the leveraging social media for actual educational purposes and then managing the potential distractions that come with it?
Yeah, it's really, when you break it down, like throughout all of human history, your social life was happening around you, of course, but there were these ebbs and flows of it's happening right now. So my social life is occurring right now because I'm around people. And now it's lulled for a little bit while I'm around different people. I'm home, so I'm not talking to them as much, et cetera, et cetera. And now in the last 30, 40, 50 years, we've changed completely from, as you know, obviously the telephone becomes a big deal. You've got radio communication that you can do. People can talk to each other at distances. We got early email that comes in. Then we've got, stuff like AOL Instant Messenger, and it starts to continue. Now, students have an ongoing social life at all moments. And that's not to say that there's not lulls in their social life. Of course there are. But at any moment, something could occur in their social life because the technology is completely open and ready. And that's such a tough thing to try and navigate because no adult really has had to face it to the level that Gen Z has.
That's true. That's
And so
true.
there's this level of social anxiety, of awareness that we don't necessarily comprehend from a lived experience. We can understand it hypothetically. You can even
Yes.
understand it, in your life right now. But the teenagers right now are kind of the first teenagers to have this raring, always constantly going because COVID happened and everything went online and everything has stayed online. And so they're just going. So I try and be respectful of the fact that, like, when kids are having panic attacks because of social media, that's real. That's just the same as if somebody has come and shouted at them in their face to them. That feels the same way. There's not really a different brain effect that occurs to them. Like, their brain responds the same way. There's no changing that. And yet
Exactly.
at the same
Exactly.
time, like, I'm not a cell phone banner. There are some teachers who that's the way they go. Awesome. That's their prerogative. You should have that. There's some schools that completely ban it. Okay, that is the direction that you've chosen to go. At my school, we don't have a policy. It's up to each individual teacher, and I'm very much of the mind that, like, hey, I have to learn how to use my cell phone appropriately at work all the time. There are times where I'm on my cell phone answering other students, my mentor group, like about somebody who's freaking out about, I forgot to turn in this college application. What do I do? And I'm like having to answer them while people are doing work in my class, right? That is like, there are ways of which you have to, as a modern day teacher, sometimes use your cell phone while you're in class appropriately. That is something
Right.
that I've been told that I can do at my job. I should not be on like Instagram,
Of course. Yeah.
just like looking at people's stuff while I'm trying to teach. Not at all. And so I try and help my students to learn when or when not it is appropriate. So, like, I have very standard rules that are consistent and regular. During work time, yeah, you can use it to do a quick text. You can use it to change your music. But if I see you too much on, I'm going to say something. And if I have to say something too many times, I'm going to take it for the rest of the block.
That makes
And
sense.
that's
That makes
and
sense.
that's like,
Yeah.
I just really want them to learn sort of these ebbs and flows. Now, I've got 15, 16-year-olds. So it's very developmentally appropriate for them to not always be meeting those expectations. So I'm not harsh about it. And I use those moments of when I'm really serious about, hey, like, today is not a day when you need to have it. Well, today is a day where I am going to take it as soon as I see it. And I try and leverage those only for moments of like vital importance.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I recently had this conversation with a colleague because we were discussing there's so many apps that help children do homework using
Mm-hmm.
AI, for example, or there are other, there are also games, lots of educational games that you
Yeah.
can use, and not just elementary school. These are games that even high school students can benefit from. And I was just discussing with him, like, what a time to be a student, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at it from the perspective like, oh, it's an amazing time to be a student. Like, you have everything at your fingertips. And then he was like, it was a little bit like a debate, but he was thinking of it from the other side that, yeah, what a
Yeah.
time to be a student. It's not the best time to be a student. You're not like, he was like, it would have been so difficult. He was thinking about, he was reflecting on himself and he was like, it would be so difficult if I had to grow up at this age. And that's exactly what you pointed out as well, that we do not have the lived experiences that our students have right now,
Yeah.
growing up with so much technology around them, so much social media around them. And what they're experiencing is something that we can try to understand, but we will never truly get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to think of it that way. But on the topic, I'm just changing the topic just a little bit. But on the topic of having these apps and things that students can just use at their fingertips, I want to talk a little bit about gamification, uh,
Hmm.
and educational games. What are your thoughts on that? How can they be utilized to enhance the educational experience for students, especially in this age, where they're 15, 16-year olds? Does it really make an impact on them?
It's not something that I've really tried as much. My class is really about allowing a ton of customization around the literature that you're getting into. And so I'm trying to increase their reading stamina as much as possible. Like, we do have some students that are on lower or very low on their reading levels. And so there has to be some building there. But for the most part, it feels like starting from square one. It feels like we've got a first grader sometimes in terms of my students' reading stamina. So I tell them all the time, hey, if you're going to watch this show, put on subtitles for me. I want you to read at the same time. In the video game, put on subtitles. I want you to read all the barks. I want you to read all the cutscenes. I want you to read all the dialogue that happens. I just want you to be reading. So I haven't been utilizing sort of cell phone apps as much as possible. I've been trying to figure out ways for them to find something that they're passionate about to physically read digitally. I mean, it can be digital as well. I just mean, like, I want their eyeballs looking at words. And that's been sort of my main focus. So it'd be interesting to go and look at some of the game. I'm not super familiar with it. Um, but yeah, I think that's been my zeroing in on, is trying to get them just to read more than a couple paragraphs before they give up. So maybe I should look into seeing what reading stamina games there are. That could be really interesting.
Yeah,
It's a good idea.
yeah. And there's also another side to this where it's not actually a game, but just you mentioned about data analytics,
Yeah.
but rather the gamification of the learning experience, whether it's a leaderboard or something like that. I know that would be a little bit more relevant, I think, on like math and science or something
Hmm.
like that. But is
I mean,
that something that you've considered?
I use Kahoot, which is like a
Hmm.
gamification. And that's something that I
Right.
use to do, like, what's it called? I mean, Kahoot, for the listeners, is like a little Quizlet game that you can do. There's a lot of other stuff that you can do it with. I use it for Quizlets to either go over information that we've just done in a lecture, in a mini lecture. I do not lecture much in my classroom, so it's always mini lectures. And I use it to go over, like, hey, what did we read over the weekend? What did I assign you? Who knows? And then oftentimes I have them in teams, so there's a little bit more like, hey, I will make lunch for everybody who in this 4 group team at the end who has the most points. And so that does
I
help
like
with
that.
people
Yeah.
trying to do that. So I have used Kahoot and stuff like that. That is stuff that I've incorporated into the classroom, and that's helpful.
That's great. That's great. So we are kind of like reaching towards the end. But before we wrap up, I just have a few, questions to kind of just ask about with the increasing use of technology, basically.
Hmm.
Um, how do you strike a balance between digital and non-digital activities in the classroom? And I know you mentioned this a little bit earlier that after COVID, now that you're in the classroom, you're trying to move away from that. Do you
Yeah.
find that there is resistance when you try to move away from using too much digital activities in your classroom?
No, I haven't found that there's much resistance, and I think that is what the indication for me about why moving away from more digital activities has been really good. Um, there are several things that we came away with COVID. Students have amazing technology literacy.
They do.
Boom. That
Much
was
more than much more than I would either.
yeah, much more than anybody else. So I
Yeah,
don't need to really work on. They are already so into the technology that, like, a computer, like, the basic computer science classes that, like, people would take in middle school, where it'd be like, this is how you type. That's not really a thing that you have to do as much anymore with students. They're
right,
already integrated into it. Um, but collaboration has become such an issue. Being able to talk to somebody in the room. It's less so as the years go by and kids have gotten more used to it.
right,
But this is something that has been so important, is to ensure that we're kind of off the computers sometimes. When kids are off the computers, boy, at least in my experience at this particular school with these particular kids, they're more focused, they're more willing to learn, and sometimes they're much more itchy to leave the classroom, which to me means there's a level of uncomfortability going on. But I haven't had anyone being like, I'm not doing this. I will have students say that on the computer because there's such more alluring things to do on the computer. And I think that's
Mhm.
really important that we're analoging a little bit. Not to sound like an old fart, but like I think that there's some aspects to analog that's really good. We're still really early in this sort of internet technology phase. I mean, internet gets created, and some of the biggest selling things, right, that come out there are random little YouTube videos that people watch and get lost in, and pornography. Like those are the two big things that come out of the internet immediately. And then we built all of this cool library and digitalization of knowledge and like these awesome ways to access the world, but we're still, I think, fairly far behind in how we orient our newest generations into utilizing technology for something that's really impactful and meaningful instead of just sort of giving that dopamine effect. So I really have been so touched that my students are really into some of the more analog stuff. And that's been really a lot more successful than digital stuff, at least in the past couple of years.
No, that's great to hear. And like you said, it's that collaboration piece is a big one. I've heard that not just from you, from many other educators, that
Yeah.
because they're so used to being on their screen or being feeling safe behind a screen, actually,
Hmm.
because then I don't really need to, even if I'm interacting with someone, whether it's through social media or messenger or something like that, I still have the security of that screen in front of me.
Yeah.
On the other hand, having to actually, interface with someone in the classroom on the spot, that I can't take back, I can't hit backspace on what I'm typing, right?
No, you
So
can't.
there is that, right? Uh,
Yeah.
but that's really interesting as well. I'm glad to hear that your class is embracing that.
Yeah.
But on that note, and I'll end off after this. But as technology, as data analytics, social media, all of these continue to evolve.
Hmm.
What are some ethical considerations that you think are crucial for educators and content creators actually to also keep in mind when utilizing these tools in an educational context?
I think it's really important in an educational context. One of the things that I really think that we should be doing is, I don't know how to say this other than saying sharing reality. Um, and that's not to say, I think a lot of kids look at Gen Z and they go, when are my kids gonna grow up, right? And that's like such a deficit mindset towards kids. There are kids who show such maturity and strength, and sometimes that maturity and strength only shows up in the phone, right? Like they are standing up to their friends there. They're really, and like nobody else knows about it except for the person who's in the chat with them. But I forget what this is called. It's like the fallacy of the survivalist or something like that. It's this idea of like, you hear about in other countries what people want to do for the top jobs is like, astronaut or doctor or lawyer for
Lawyer.
social
Yeah.
justice,
Yeah.
educators sometimes trying to
Right.
get water to rural areas, that sort of thing. And then in the United States, the top job that teenagers want, as of 2 years ago when I read this article, is content creator.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, which is like kind of bummy. Content is really great. And so content creators, we should continue to make it. There's so much individualism out there. There's so much people who like all sorts of different things. And it's great when you create content, there's almost always going to be an audience for it. And we don't always have to have a big audience. I'm on a podcast about Harry Potter stuff. We have a listenership. It's not huge. That's great. We're creating content. It's awesome. At the same time, there are these huge realities that we need to have. Like we have to have people who help other people get better in life. Personal trainers, doctors, doulas. People are going to continue to birth babies. Like we need to have those people and people who are willing and able to do it. Like, oh man, am I excited for that? And robots shouldn't have to do every single job. So like we don't. I hope there's always a human always helping to birth a baby. I hope it's not just AI and robots someday. But I, the fallacy of the survivalist is this idea of like, well, you know, this guy, this content creator, they made it and they dropped out of high school, therefore I can. And what they're looking at is the 0.00001%
Right.
that made it. And they're not looking at the 99 plus percent that hasn't made it.
Because those
And
are the stories that come up, right? The one,
yeah,
the,
those
yeah,
are the stories. Those are
yeah.
that kids point and say that's going to be me. And I love the dreams. I never would ever shoot anybody's dreams down. But my immediate next steps are like, okay, so what video equipment are you using? How are you doing your YouTubes? What video editing software are you using? How often are you doing it? How are you building your view? You view yourself, because these are critical questions. So I think the most thing that I think we have to do, both as content creators, as teachers, as everything, is to create an environment that pushes our kids to think metacognitively and critically, so that they're thinking about themselves and they're thinking about the world around them critically in a way that is holistic and is a way that is oriented to helping others around them. And that is my big hope for the world. And boy, is it a soapbox moment.
I love that. And honestly, about critical thinking and making sure that your students hone that skill, I could go on about that, but I won't right now. That was an amazing way to end off this conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I really enjoyed our conversation, Sam. I want to extend our heartfelt appreciation for you coming on this show and sharing your insights, your expertise. Thank you. Thank you for your invaluable contribution.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was a great conversation.
Thank you. So, to our cherished audience, we hope that this exploration has ignited new insights and invigorated your commitment to progressive educational approaches. We invite you to engage with us, sharing your thoughts, anecdotes, and discoveries on today's captivating subject across various social media platforms. Let's continue the dialogue using the hashtag Magic Educator Insights. As we eagerly await our next episode, stay attuned to the ever evolving educational landscape. Until then, keep embracing the transformative power of knowledge and keep learning.